Don has been a member of HAS for a little bit over 20 years here, since 2003. He's been an avid amateur astronomer, astro imager, and HAS member. He's a former president of HAS. He has become quite the competent astrophotographer and imager. He's also got plenty of experience on eclipses. He's experienced this eclipse. This time it's going to be his third eclipse. He traveled out of China in 2009 to get rained out for one of them, and then had a better experience in 2017. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don to tell us a little bit more about the great eclipses of history and maybe some of his own experiences as well. Take it away, Don.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
I'm sharing my screen so you can get yours up.
Yeah. I hope you all appreciate the fact that I'm acting as one of these type of people that has done something once and now becomes an expert at it. Okay, so you have to make allowances for me as we go through this presentation. But I also wanted to just kind of keep it entertaining as well. So we're going to talk about great eclipses of history. Okay, with that, I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. And I just want to thank you all for putting up with me for this. So I think everybody watching this has a pretty good appreciation of the fact that eclipses are a pretty major thing. I know a lot of our members have geared up, and a lot of them are already out in the hill country here, ready to view the eclipse. But it's really interesting to note how eclipses have grabbed people's attention virtually since the start of recorded history. So we're going to talk about a few eclipse concepts to get started, because I want to make sure everybody's on the same level. And then I'm going to define what I think makes an eclipse a great eclipse, because it seems like every eclipse I've in recent years has been dubbed a great eclipse. And I'm sure they're all great, but let's put some ideas to that, and then we'll go back in history, and finally we'll end up with the GOAT, the greatest of all totalities. So starting off a little bit with eclipse concepts, everybody knows that's on here knows this. You have sunlight, you have a new moon in front of the sun, and you have a total eclipse, right? It gets a little bit more complicated than that when you want to start talking about being able to predict eclipses, and that's why I want to get a little bit more into detail. So here's a diagram. It's not to scale of what an eclipse looks like. So you can see we have actually. Let me get my laser pen here, or laser pointer. You can see the moon's in front of the Earth, roughly to scale, but the sun's not. So in the middle, you have the umbra, which is the main shadow where totality is. But because the sun is such an extended object, if you are outside of that direct shadow, you'll start picking up light from one side of the sun or the other. So you get this area where we're going to see partial eclipse, which is called the penumbra. And moving on a little bit further, so why don't eclipses occur every month? We know we've got a new moon every month. Why not an eclipse every month, lunar or solar eclipse? Well, the truth of the matter is that and this is just a conceptual diagram, because the sun doesn't really orbit the Earth, but back in the ancient days they thought it did, because it kind of looks that way. So, and it makes it easier to describe things with eclipses. The apparent orbit of the sun, or the sun's path around the Earth, and the moon's path around the Earth are actually separated by about 5 degrees. They're 2 ellipses, and if you can think of like 2 hula hoops that kind of gyrate a little bit with each other. Not only are they separated by 5 degrees, but they rotate a little bit. So what in order for a solar eclipse to occur, the moon has to be in the new moon phase, which means that it's at conjunction with the sun. It's very close to the sun, but the moon must also be and the sun must also be at one of these node points. That's where the the parent orbit of the sun and the actual orbit of the moon cross over each other. That's when the moon will actually line up directly in front of the sun, or vice versa. When it's a full moon, the shadow of the Earth will be between the moon and the sun, and you'll have a lunar eclipse. So when everything lines up in a straight line, here's a great word for you for a trivia question. It's called a syzygy, and I actually heard that in a non-astronomy a trivia contest about 10 years ago. So remember that. It might get you a beer in a pub someday. So it basically, the fact that everything's arranged in this, it means that somewhere on the Earth, it varies a little bit, but somewhere between every 18 months, at least every 18 months, there's going to be a solar eclipse somewhere on the Earth. Okay, now getting a little bit more detail with that. The geometry in order for an eclipse to repeat itself, things get a little bit more specific. Again, the moon must be in the new moon phase, and that happens a little bit over every 27 days. The longitude of the apogee or perigee, that's close when the moon is closest to, or the farthest away from the Earth, must be the same from one eclipse to another eclipse. That's the repeat eclipse. And again, that's a little bit more than the synodic month, but again, it's about 27 days. The moon and the sun must also line up at the same node of the eclipse you're trying to repeat. That's called a draconic or nodal month. And again, it's about 27 days, but slightly different than the other two. And then the Earth and sun and moon must be in a line in the same spot. That's called must be in line basically on the same celestial longitude. And that also happens about once every 27 days in the Earth in the orbit. I mean, at a period of 27 days, we'll see the lineups. So in order for it to repeat, all these things have to even out. So it takes 239 of one, 241 of another, 242 of sidereal, 223 of synodic months for a precise realignment. That equates to every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, you'll get the same exact alignment of the Earth, the moon, and the sun. But because of the 8 hours, the alignment, everything will be exactly the same. But the eclipse will be in a different place on the Earth, about a third of the way around the Earth from where it occurred 18 years before. In order for it to repeat in exactly the same spot, therefore, you have to have 3 of those what's called the Soros transpire, which means every 54 years and 34 days, or 3 Soros periods, the same exact eclipse will happen, alignment, at exactly the same spot on the Earth, or pretty close to exactly the same spot, I should say. Okay, that's the end of the detail, okay? I just wanted you to appreciate how ancient people could actually figure out when eclipses were going to happen. They kept track of all of that stuff. So now we go on to my interpretation of what makes an eclipse great. Most people who are asked this question, maybe you've been to one or two, or people who are eclipse chasers all over the world, they're going to tell you all solar eclipses are great. But I had to narrow it down a little bit. So here's my criteria. And before I get started, I have to bore you again with a public safety announcement. The criteria for a great historic eclipse discussed in this presentation, and the whole presentation itself represents the views of the presentation's author, who is solely responsible for its content, do not necessarily represent the views of the Houston Astronomical Society, its leadership, or its members. HAS disavows all responsibility for the following presentation. So now that I've cleared HAS, I can get as crazy as I want to, right? So for me, what it boils down to are a few things. A great historical eclipse will have caught the attention of historians, archaeologists, or scientists, people who want to learn or use those eclipses for data. Some eclipses have changed the course of history. Some have caused wars to cease and peace to break out. Others have changed the way we view the world and our universe. Some have resulted in a new scientific discovery. Others are mentioned in tales, legends, poetries, and songs. So here's a trivia question. This great eclipse of history was included in the lyrics of a 1972 song that in early 1973 reached #1 in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This song would be rated 72nd in Billboard's 50th anniversary Top 100 list. What's the song? What total eclipse is mentioned? Any ideas?
Carly Simon, right?
Carly Simon. Bill, you got that. You got the singer. If you're a child of the 70s, the lyrics are going through your head now.
You're so vain.
You're so vain. And the total eclipse was the eclipse of July 10th, 1972, which nobody ever heard about because it went from Alaska in North America, went from Alaska across the Siberian Canada and crossed into Halifax. So the lyrics are, I hear you went to Saratoga and your horse naturally won. Then you flew your Learjet up to Nova Scotia to see the total eclipse of the sun. I want you to all remember that. I do put together a trivia contest, an astronomy trivia contest that we sometimes do at our December meeting. And I guarantee you this question will be on it. You'll have a freebie. Okay. So with that in mind, I also have to say I'm very opinionated. So I have to tell you about the great eclipses I have observed or will observe. The first one was the Great Asian Eclipse. And it was called the Great Asian Eclipse because it spanned most of Asia from all the way across India, Central Asia, all the way through China. And it would be the longest, it's going to be the longest total eclipse in the whole 21st century. And I think it got dubbed Great Eclipse because it was estimated that 421 million people lived in the zone of totality. Problem was that the weather over eastern India was really cloudy. Central Asia was okay, but China was totally clouded out. I was working over in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia at the time, and I made the trek up to Shanghai, figuring I'd camp out in Shanghai, nice hotel up there, and see the eclipse. When I got there, the weather report was terrible. So I jumped on the bullet train and I went like crazy to Wuhan, China, 2009. Who the heck knew where Wuhan, China was, right? Well, I got some eclipse pictures, and these are the best eclipse pictures of my 2009 experience. So did I think this was a very great eclipse? Not really. Sorry. I would have loved to have seen it. I know Debbie Moran also found herself in Wuhan. We've talked. She presented that, and I talked to her about it, and we were actually only about a block apart when we were there and didn't know it. So now we come to the Great American Eclipse, the last one here in the U.S. back in August, and it had a pretty short duration, but it went all the way across the U.S. And it, while it had a short duration, the weather was pretty good pretty much everywhere across the U.S. It had a pretty big impact on people. Totality was about 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and in an after eclipse report, it was estimated that over 215 million people in North America actually saw this eclipse. Most of the USA was in the partial eclipse area, so a lot of people saw the partial eclipse. And virtually everybody that saw it had a smartphone. There were lots of pictures, lots of stuff going around the internet. There were several NASA-sponsored or otherwise sponsored citizen science projects that were going on, and including people that I should say some high school students that flew weather balloons up in the while the total eclipse was going on to measure how the atmosphere might change. And if you go to a website that I watch pretty closely called spaceweather.com, that group is still together, and they launch weather balloons at least once a month to collect radiation data from the upper atmosphere. So it was a good project to get them all kicked off. And I think the fact that we have a bunch of high school kids who are carrying this on 6-7 years later is pretty amazing. I captured some pretty good eclipse pictures myself. Okay, I was very lucky to get this. It was actually from my backup camera. The landscape and nightscape images that I got were awesome. This is the first nightscape image that I took that I actually was happy with. We went to Jackson Hole area, Grand Teton Village, and then Thursday after the eclipse was Tuesday, I went out and caught this nightscape. Walt Cooney was with me, and I asked him to come and back me up in case there were bears there. I knew I could outrun them. And after I dropped him off at the airport, I got 45 seconds of the most awesome, perfect light, sunrise sunlight I've had in my life as a photographer, and since I've never duplicated, and got this really nice image. So I thought that was a pretty great eclipse. Now we come to the one that's coming up on Monday. It's been dubbed a great eclipse as well because, frankly, it runs through as many states, actually more states than the one in 2017 did. We know for a fact that just in the zone of totality, there's about 30 or 31 million people who live there. And again, as many as 200 million could view it, but will the weather cooperate? I don't know. It's not looking great now, but I hope if you are all going to be heading out to view it, you had plans to do it, go ahead and still do it, because if you don't buy a lottery ticket, you can't win the lottery. And if you've never seen a totality and you miss this opportunity, you might get a break in the clouds. You're going to kick yourself. It is one of the most awesome things I've ever done in my life. But for me, it's also the greatness is, will I get a good picture of it? I'm going to try. We'll see. So now, enough of my rambling about what great eclipses are, and I've done a little bit of looking on the internet, and it's now time to dive back into the ancient history and talk about some of the cooler things about eclipses that are in the historical record. First, it's pretty important to understand that the ancient Chinese, the Babylonians, the Greeks, all in ancient times, they all kept very good records of a lot of astronomical phenomena, the movement of planets, and so on. They used the stars to predict where they were in the seasons, and the better records they kept, the more likely they were to be able to start seeing patterns. And we'll get to that in a minute. But right now, I think what ranks as the oldest record of an eclipse is an eclipse that occurred on November 30th, 3340 BCE, before our current era. The signs were found at a place in Ireland. It's actually a burial monument, if you will. Lots of barrows where people were buried. Lots of monuments, and there was actually this group of rocks here has a number of circular and signs carved into it that archaeoastronomers have determined that indicated the position of some planets and some stars when an eclipse took place. They went back and with a rough idea what the date was, and actually determined the most likely is this November 30th eclipse, total solar eclipse. Which to me, that's amazing. I can't imagine how they were able to do that, but it's a pretty well accepted fact apparently. As far as the Chinese, both the Chinese and the Babylonians have been keeping eclipse records at least since 2500 BCE. Solar eclipses were very remarkable things, and the Chinese folklore was developed to explain. Nobody really knew back then how or why these total eclipses occurred. So they kind of made things up. And in terms of the folklore, the Chinese believed that there were dragons that lived remember the ascending and descending nodes that I showed you in the eclipse diagram? They said that there were dragons that lived in those nodes, and when the sun would approach those nodes, the dragon would eat it. And when it was successful at capturing the sun, in order to keep the sun from being removed from existence, people ran out and banged pots and pans and made as much noise as they could to scare the dragon away. Because they thought the dragon lived at the nodes, the period of time that it takes for the moon to pass through and return to either the ascending or descending node of its orbit in relationship to the path of the sun, it's called the Draconic month. The Draconic means dragon, dragon month, and that's in our lexicon today. Chinese astrologers also recorded many total eclipses on what are now called oracle bones. They were the shoulder bones of oxes or the carapaces of tortoises, and they recorded major historical events on there, and eclipses were significant enough that they all got in there. particularly the record of one from this October 2234 BC said the sun and moon did not meet harmoniously. And legend has it that when this eclipse occurred, there were two court astrologers that were supposed to have predicted it. And when they didn't, they kind of lost their heads as punishment for the failure. It was viewed as being a very bad mark of the emperor that eclipse was not predicted. Babylonians also kept very good astronomical records of all types, and in particular, they kept quite good eclipse records as well. It turns out that on these clay tablets that have been recovered and that have been translated, over 60 eclipses are noted or predicted since 1063 BCE. It also showed that studying these tablets showed that the Babylonians could predict eclipses as early as 800 BCE. And they did it using the Saros cycle I showed you earlier. So every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, they saw that cycle every 54 days and every 54 years and 33 days. One of the great eclipses that occurred in this area, the Assyrians and the Babylonians occupied a lot of the same area, and at different times the Babylonians were on top, and the Assyrians, then later the Assyrians were on top, but they kept the same culture of keeping track of astronomical events. The Great Assyrian Eclipse took place on 15 June 763. This is actually a pretty crucial eclipse in terms of historians going back and pegging where in history, how many years ago things actually happened, because there's quite a bit of other historical data that surrounds the description of this eclipse. So they know when those things happen, and then they can use that to make estimates of when other historical events happened that weren't so well documented. During this particular eclipse, known as I'm not sure I can pronounce this, the Bur Sagala eclipse. It was during the 10th year of the reign of King Ashur-dan III. When this happened, historians believe that the city of Azur was in revolt against the Assyrian Empire. And this eclipse didn't go over well. It boded very badly for the Assyrian Empire. There's also ties with to the biblical story of the prophet Jonah and the prophet Amos, and these have been pretty well documented. So the biblical connections are kind of interesting. That's if you know the story of Jonah, God commands him to go to the city of Nineveh, which was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire at the time, and preach repentance to the people there. And Jonah was like, "Yeah, you got to be crazy. If I go and do that, first thing they're going to do is hoist me on a pole and put me over the fire." So Jonah takes off on a boat, and he on his way to the city of Tarshish. Turns out there was a really bad storm, and they cast lots. The sailors cast lots, and Jonah lost. So they threw him overboard, and that's supposedly how he ended up in the belly of a fish or a whale. So after 3 days, the fish spit him out. And at that point, Jonah said, well, I guess I've been told. And he actually went to Nineveh and started preaching that in 40 days, Nineveh would be overthrown and destroyed if the people didn't repent. Well, as soon as the king Ashur-dan heard that, with everything that was going bad for him already, and the eclipse having just gone through, he tore his robes off and went out, put dust all over himself, which was a way of showing people that you're repenting. And apparently, a good part of the population, according to the Book of Jonah, did the same thing. So again, it's thought that the timing of that eclipse and Jonah coming into town shortly after that was a big reason that the story turned out the way it did. The Greeks also had pretty good astronomical records, and one of the eclipses that stands out, ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote about a lot of things, but one of the things in his history is the history of the battle between the Lydians and the Medes. And in May 28th of 585 BC, there was a total eclipse that happened right over the river of Halys, Halys, where this battle had this war had been raging for pretty close to 15 years, and the battle was going on back and forth, and in the middle of the battle, the sun went black, and it scared the living daylights out of all of the warriors, and they backed off from each other. They stopped the battle, and it actually they withdrew, and it allowed other parties to get in and negotiate a long-term truce. It turned out that that particular river, Halys, became the new boundary between the two kingdoms. So, not knowing, being superstitious and not knowing what caused an eclipse had a tremendous effect in that part of the world at that date. So those were the ones in eclipses in real ancient history that caught my attention. There's a lot more recent history that's also pretty interesting. There's a lot of artwork. If you just look around on the internet, it's possible to find quite a bit of really interesting artwork that's been done over the years to document people's experience with eclipses. So the first one is the annular eclipse of January 27th, 632. This happened in over the city of Medina in Saudi Arabia, which is now Saudi Arabia, and it turned out that that this eclipse occurred a couple of days after the Prophet Muhammad's young son Ibrahim had died, and as a result of that, again, the population there was very superstitious about eclipses, and so in order to kind of make sense out of it for themselves, they came up with the idea that God was had snuffed out the sun to create a miracle. It's a sign that he was sad, that God was sad that Ibrahim had died. Well, to his credit, Muhammad basically killed the rumor. I don't know that he necessarily knew what an eclipse was, but his reasoning was that the sun and moon are signs of God, and no eclipse for any man on earth. God won't create an eclipse for any man on earth. So he's trying to, for sure, banish the idea that eclipse is a bad omen, or a sign from God having to do with a human being. Again, we kind of get into this idea of total eclipses being bad for rulers. When we get into medieval Britain, King Henry the Confessor, who was the last king of the House of Wessex before the Normans came over and took it over, he was never a very strong king, and things were going back and forth with his reign. He was fragile health, and he was having to deal with the fact that he didn't really have any direct offspring, and so in order to keep everybody at bay, he was promising the throne after he died to different factions to keep them happy. Well, then the eclipse of August 2nd, 1033 happened, and shortly thereafter, his fragile health deteriorated, and he died about 18 months later. Well, of course, the people, being superstitious, believed that Henry died because the eclipse finally did him in. It was a sign from God that his time was up, or the humor of the hidden moon infected him, something silly like that. And this story became a legend in British history, all the way down until the time of Isaac Newton in the end of the 16th, beginning of the early 17th century. Isaac Newton did a huge amount, if you probably all know, in terms of advancing the cause of science in Western thought and culture. The story is told that when Newton was working out the theory of gravity and starting to plot out how that would affect the orbits of the planets and the moon and so on, he put a sign on the wall that said, "The king will not die." And some actually took that as a reminder to himself that eclipses are not supernatural harbingers that predetermine the death of kings. And again, Newton was one of the first that was able to scientifically describe what happens during an eclipse. This is the only lunar eclipse that I stuck in here because I really like this story. When on Christopher Columbus's, I think it was his fourth voyage to the New World, they hit a storm, and they had quite a bit of damage and lost one of the three ships, and the other two were pretty badly damaged. They were able to beach the ships in Jamaica, and things being as they were, they didn't have a lot of food with them, and they met a pretty powerful group of indigenous people there. And initially, the local people were cooperative, and they actually helped Columbus's crew and fed them. 6 months went by, and tensions rose. Things got a little bit testy, and the locals cut off the food supply. Well, Columbus was a pretty smart guy. He had a astronomical almanac on board with him, and he happened to be looking through it one day and realized that there was going to be a lunar eclipse within the next couple of weeks. So he invited the head people of the local group, and after some preliminaries, told them that God was very angry with them because they weren't helping Columbus and his crew, and that God was going to send a direct sign of his anger to them, and it would show up the day after night after tomorrow night. And sure enough, when the lunar eclipse started, they all caved. They couldn't. The fact that Columbus predicted it and that it was such an unusual sight totally unnerved the locals, and they started the food delivery again, and basically kept Columbus and his crew from starving. So not a great story by today's standards, but I thought, it just kind of an example of how that superstition can be used in a bad way. Okay, so let's talk about eclipse science and eclipse science first. This is a part of the presentation that I really enjoy the most. Okay, so now we're getting into more closer towards current times. We all have heard, if you've done anything with a total eclipse, you will have heard the term Baily's beads. Well, these were actually first described by astronomer Francis Baily in 1836. He and a group of others traveled to time the annular eclipse of May 15th, 1836. And as it came nearer, Baily assumed he would see a very smooth edge of the moon crossing into the sun. But as it got close to the edge, he noticed that it looked like a string of pearls, and that's where the term beads came from, Baily's beads. And he was totally mystified by what that was. But he waited a little bit, and sure enough, the edge of the moon became straight again after the annular eclipse proceeded. That's when they started the timing. Well, there were several others in the area where he was observing the eclipse that were able to verify his observation, and he wrote it up for the Royal Astronomical Society, and that's how it got to be called Baily's beads. It wasn't until probably about 40 or 50 years later that others realized that this was part of the edge of the eclipsed sun showing through mountain valleys that were on the limb of the lunar limb at the time. So I really like this picture that Fred Aspenack, who goes by the moniker of Mr. Eclipse, got in 1999. I thought it was the best one I'd seen. So I'm also, you could have figured I'm into astrophotography. So the first eclipse photo really means something to me. And that was 1851. It was done in the Prussian city of Königsberg, which is now actually in Russia, by a gentleman, Johann Berkowski. Berkowski actually was the best photographer in a large area around that Königsberg area, and he was actually commissioned by the Royal Prussian Observatory there in Königsberg to photograph the sun's corona. Now, you have to appreciate that this is not a film camera. This is obviously not a digital camera. It's a daguerreotype, and the daguerreotype process was used highly polished copper plates that were chemically treated. They were light sensitive, but they weren't very light sensitive. It took a lot of light to record an image, and then they had to be specially developed after they were exposed, including the use of mercury vapor and other chemicals. But if you look at this, up front, it's actually quite a good image of the inner corona, and there's actually solar prominences that are visible in this image. So for the first one, it's really quite good. And I'm so jealous that it wasn't me that got that photograph. I hate to put it that way, but you would have been if you got something that important as a first image nowadays, you'd be a rock star in the amateur astronomy league. And as we get further into towards the modern times, science starts taking over, and it's really interesting to understand that once that happened, most of the superstition surrounding lunar and solar eclipses started to evaporate. It took a long time, but this was the beginning. Kepler really was the first one. Besides describing the heliocentric theory of the solar system, he was able to use that knowledge and use it to understand how eclipses work, which helped him to develop a more accurate way of predicting eclipses than just a plain old Saros cycle. Basically, once he knew the position of the sun, earth, and the moon, he would use a graphical method to try and project the moon's shadow on the earth. If you think about it, that's almost like setting up a globe and a light source in the moon and seeing where the shadow fell. He published the method in 1627. Later on, in 1715, well, actually before 1715, Edmund Halley used a prediction method fairly similar to what Kepler used, although by that time it was refined, and it was the first eclipse prediction that was done with really considerable accuracy. He was only 4 minutes off on the actual time of totality, and the path location of totality was only about 18 miles. The prediction was only 18 miles different than what was actually observed. And this particular eclipse path here is the May 3rd, 1715 eclipse that he predicted. And you can see it goes right through the heart of England. London would be up in this area. And so a lot of his contemporaries were able to verify his prediction. Again, you jump ahead about another 30 or 40 years, and we're starting to see this prediction technique getting refined. I thought this chart was really quite amazing and beautiful, and this is the kind of work that always draws me to look at scientific history, because so much of it was done graphically, and the graphics are amazing. An individual by the name of Lowitz used tables of predictions of where the sun, moon, and planets would be that had been created by the mathematician Leonard Euler, and used them to predict the solar eclipse of 25 July 1748. His system was very similar to Halley's system, but he had also improved on it. And he not only published these charts well ahead of the time, but he also explained all the details in an accompanying document that went along with these. So it's kind of like this scientific method at work. another very interesting thing that happened during an eclipse. The element helium was discovered during eclipse in August of 1868, also dubbed as the King of Siam's eclipse because of the eclipse totality path went right over to Thailand. So, I mean, besides the fact that that helium is like it's the second most abundant element in the whole universe. Nobody knew about it at this time on Earth because helium is so light a gas that it boiled off out of the Earth's atmosphere long before anybody had any idea to look for it. Well, so you had a number of professional and amateur astronomers at this time that were in the process of using astronomy equipment to determine or to view the sun, and they realized that eclipses were a really good opportunity to do that kind of work. So, sure enough, that's how helium was discovered. Also, between 1859 and 1865, the science of spectroscopy was really getting started and really taken off. So, what happened was during this eclipse, a gentleman by the name of Janssen. This is Pierre Janssen on the top. He was a professor of architecture at University of Paris. He used a spectroscope that he had, and he was able to observe the solar prominences. A lot of folks have been able to use it to observe the actual body of the sun. He waited until the total eclipse and was able to get a spectra from solar prominence. And this is kind of what this is a modern one, but this is what a flash spectrum of the sun. It's basically putting a grating in front of your telescope, and they actually looked at these visually. They didn't have a good way of making photographs of them. And what should Jensen see but a really interesting yellow line that he'd never seen before in any other spectrum. And he made note of it. He had a pretty good idea because of the way his spectroscope was calibrated about the wavelength of the line, and he reported it. He also made the observation that if he had the right kind of filter, he wouldn't have to wait for a eclipse of the sun to be able to observe this. Well, he had there was an astronomer in England by the name of Norman Lockyer who was working on just such a filter, and he got it shortly after Janssen made his discovery. And in October 28th, the same year, 1868, he observed the sun with that filter and saw the helium line. Both of the men wrote up their reports and sent them to both the French Academy of Sciences and the British Society as well. And it turned out that both of their papers were read at the French Academy of Sciences on the same day, and as a result, both of them were given precedence for the discovery. Remember our oracle bones from China? Well, there was a lot more that had to do with those oracle bones than just keeping track of eclipses. It turns out that that for over 3,000 years, that there's been a record of eclipses that's been kept in one area of China. Initially, they were recorded on these oracle bones in a city called Anyang, China. And over 3,000 years later, a group of astronomers from NASA JPL decided to look at the this long 3,000 year record and see if they could figure out if anything had changed with regards to the spin of the Earth. Well, it turns out that they ended up with over 60 eclipses that they were able to get from records, and they knew pretty precisely where these ancient records eclipses had taken place, because they were all recorded on in the same city, and they were all said to be seen in that city. So the upshot was that using the data from, including this really ancient data, they were able to show that the Earth's rotation rate has been slowing at an average of about 47 thousandths of a second per day over the last 3,200 years. That's a pretty amazing, to me, that's a pretty amazing finding. And it all had to do with the fact that there were very accurate records kept both in ancient times and in more modern times, on where these eclipses were and when they took place. Finally, we get to the GOAT, the greatest of all totalities, and that's Einstein's eclipse on May 29th, 1919. Many of you probably know this story, but this is really the eclipse measurement that really proved Einstein's theory of general relativity. So a little bit of background. When Einstein was trying to develop his theory of general theory of relativity, of course, he's coming up with things and trying them out, coming up with things and trying them out to see if that theory would work. He realized that what gravity really was, it wasn't the force that Newton had told us it was. It was the fact that concentrations of matter and energy could actually change the shape of space and alter the way time flows, the space-time. It would warp space-time. And as a result of that, I mean, it's a huge change in our perception of how we understand the universe. Well, the fact is that 1915, he's got this theory. He's done a couple of things to try and match it up with known phenomena at the time. One of which was he did some early calculations on the bending of starlight. Newton had theorized that that gravity would bend starlight, but it wasn't until around 1804 that mathematician and physicist, a German by the name of Johann von Soldner, actually calculated how a light beam passing very, very close, so infinitely close to the sun, would be bent. And he actually got an answer of about 84 hundredths of an arc second, that it would be deflected. And this is using standard Newtonian physics and the idea of corpuscular light, or particles of light, even though they had no mass. As he was trying to hone in on a general theory of relativity, in 1911, Einstein published a similar calculation, but using a different approach that was part of his early version of general relativity. It turned out that his conclusions almost matched exactly on Soldner's. He got criticized for it. In fact, there were some that said he actually plagiarized von Soldner. But anyway, it turned out that it wasn't a complete approach to solving the problem, and there were some errors in it. So it wasn't until until after he pretty much completed his general theory, and that he tried that calculation again. Before that, he actually solved the problem of the precession of Mercury. It was known that Mercury's orbit shifted as it rotated around the sun based on the influence of other planets in further out in the solar system. The problem is that the shift was about more than twice what could be calculated using Newtonian gravity. Well, once Einstein finished his general theory, he did the same conclusion, and he came up with almost exactly what was observed. It wasn't exact, but it was within the error range of the observations that were made. But for most people at the time, most that knew about relativity, that wasn't enough. So starting in about 1914, 1915, Einstein started publishing papers where he would make predictions on what to look for to see if general relativity was actually a real thing. The main one he came up with was the idea of the sun bending starlight, and turns out that one of the main characters in this eclipse story was Arthur Eddington, who was I guess you would call him a Cambridge Don at the time. He was had an endowed astronomy chair at Cambridge. He was quite a mathematical genius as well. It turned out that he saw some of Einstein's work in 1916, and he became very interested not just in the theory of relativity, but what could be done to prove it. And before it was finally proven in 1919, he was asked in an interview. The interviewer asked him, "Isn't this general theory of relativity something nobody in the world really understands? Maybe 3 people understand it." Eddington said, "Well, Einstein understands it. I understand it. I don't know who else does." So, I mean, he was not a particularly modest guy, right? So, he was also a Quaker and a pacifist, and he was drafted for World War I in 1917. But because he was already doing work aimed at this 1919 eclipse expedition, the astronomer royal at the time, Frank Dyson, spoke on his behalf and basically convinced the judge that was hearing the case that Eddington involvement in this planning and execution of this 1919 eclipse expedition was a national priority. So Eddington didn't have to become a soldier, and he was free to plan the eclipse. The other main character, I mentioned Dyson already, Frank Watson Dyson. He was Astronomer Royal of Britain from 1910 until 1933. What that means is it was a royal position, based, the crown appointed him, but that also meant that he was the head of the Greenwich Observatory. His specialty was solar phenomena, and he had organized several eclipse expeditions to measure things about the sun during an eclipse. One in 1916 was supposed to test Einstein's theory, but it was rained out, kind of like I got in Wuhan, China. Really bad. So he was the driving force in organizing the expedition, and it was set up expressly to confirm Einstein's theory of relativity. So where was the eclipse? The eclipse went from all the way across Brazil, across the Atlantic Ocean, and across a little island called Principe off of West Africa, and then into the deepest, darkest parts of Africa. The reason why they chose this 1919 eclipse is that the sun would be eclipsed right in front of a very bright cluster of stars called the Hyades cluster. And that would make photographing the stars near the eclipsed sun much easier. Two sites were chosen, one in Brazil in a town called Sobral, which the local professional astronomy authorities in Brazil recommended as the best place to view the eclipse, and also on the island of Principe. Eddington was from Cambridge Observatory and was sent to Principe, and a fellow by the name of Andrew Crommelin was from Greenwich Observatory and was to head up the Sobral observations. So off they went. Sobral had two telescopes, a 13-inch main telescope and a 4-inch backup telescope. And it turns out that it really was a very good place to observe the eclipse, except that the weather was a little bit iffy. It actually was pretty cloudy early in the early phases of the eclipse, but it seemed to clear up for totality. Totality there lasted 5 minutes and 13 seconds, and the main telescope, they took a bunch of different plates, photographic plates with it. It recorded 12 stars, but the problem was the focus was so blurry that they were viewed as not suitable for measurement. The backup telescope was a 4-inch, and it wasn't really thought that it was going to be a critical piece of the equation, but it did record 7 stars, and it had a very sharp image. And of course, they measured the stars for that one, and they appeared to support Einstein's theory. Well, on Principe, there was kind of the same thing going on. The eclipse was set to begin at 2 p.m. The totality was, again, it was about 5 minutes of totality, and it was very rainy in the morning. But the rain cleared up, and there were scattered clouds before 2 p.m. And that's what we're going to see on Monday, I'm sure. Scattered thunder showers on Monday morning and total eclipse at Monday afternoon. But anyway, there was one telescope there. It was, I believe, a 12-inch telescope. And Eddington was the operator of that telescope. He took 16 image plates that he wrote. They all showed the sun well, but clouds interfered with all but the last few photographs. He wrote in his notes, the last few photographs show a few images, which I hope will give us what we need. When the plates were developed, Eddington attempted to measure them, and it took a few days, but he finally recorded one plate I measured gave the result agreeing with Einstein. Well, that's pretty thin gruel when you're trying to prove a theory like general relativity. Fortunately, the backup camera in Sobral had 7 very good stars that were measured well, and they were the backup or the additional support for this one plate that was recorded in 1919. Well, that basically sealed the deal. General relativity had made the prediction that the starlight would be bent by 1.85 arc seconds right at the limb of the sun, and sure enough, that's what was measured within a very small error bar, and within a couple of days of the news being released in November 1919, the buzz was all over the place, and Einstein became an overnight celebrity. Interestingly enough, I didn't know this till I did the research. The announcement of the theory of relativity being proven led to a boom in the sale of popular science books at the time. Eddington also became pretty well known, and he authored 3 or 4 books in the couple of years afterwards, and he made a bunch of money off of it. You can see on the side here the New York Times headlines for the story: "Lights all askew in the heavens. Men of science more or less agog over the results of eclipse observations, and Einstein theory triumphs." And as a result of it, several months later, when Eddington was addressing a meeting of the Royal Astronomical Society, he, in his address, he wove in a 4-line poem echoing Omar Khayyam. "Oh, leave the wise our measures to collate. One thing at least is certain: light has weight. One thing is certain: the rest is debate. Light rays, when near the sun, do not go straight." So, one last thing. I just wanted to give a shout out to the fact that in 2017, for the Great American Eclipse, and I think this is one of the things that made it great, the Astronomical League offered an award for those who were willing to try and recreate the 1919 general relativity results during that eclipse. And I know there were probably about 30 or 40, talking to Aaron Clevenson, I think there were like between 30 and 35 groups that over the whole U.S. that actually groups or individuals that got that award. Some of them with kind of loosened requirements. I tried it. I really was set to go. My automation kind of failed at the last minute. So I mean, I have really huge respect for the folks who did this with photographic plates in 1919, because the guys, the people who did it in 2017 had their work cut out for them, and they got amazing results. And one of them was led by an astroimaging pioneer by the name of Richard Berry. Richard Berry, back when I first got involved in astroimaging early in 2005, he was the only one that had a program that you could use with a CCD camera that worked. And he was a true pioneer in that area. He took it upon himself to take a group of students with him, and he coached a couple other teams beside the one he's shown within this picture. I understand rumor has it that Richard Berry's with another student group somewhere here in the Texas Hill Country, trying to do this again in 2024. So wish us all luck and good weather, and thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. Any questions? Kind of long and involved. If you got any questions, go ahead and come off mute and hit me.
Well, Don, I just wanted to make, and this is James Wooden.
Oh, yeah.
I was at the 2009 eclipse in Shanghai,
Yeah.
and I observed a phenomenon that surprised me. I wanted to ask if anyone else in the club has observed it. See, it was cloudy and rainy in Shanghai, but we went to the port, the Yangshan port, all the way out toward the ocean to be as close to sunlight as possible. And it wasn't raining there; it was just overcast, thick clouds. So we missed the first part of the eclipse. We missed totality. It got really dark, and then right after that, I heard a squeal. I looked up, and the clouds had thinned out enough that we could actually watch the partial phases after totality through very thick cloud cover, but not as thick as before, of course.
Wow.
And so apparently the lower temperature for 6 minutes. That was that eclipse was a 6 minute eclipse. The 6 minutes of totality had made the air cool enough to get to thin the clouds out. So you went from very thick clouds to not quite as thick clouds, and we were able to watch dimly the partial phases as totality ended. And that's, of course, people in Shanghai were just rained out completely. But I was wondering if you or anyone else has observed that phenomenon where the totality allows the clouds to thin out a bit.
Well, I certainly haven't, although I did see a picture in the newspaper, James, in Shanghai when I went back through that I think was taken not far away from where you were. It showed clouds, and it did show what looked like a partial phase. So you're the only person I know that's actually saw it, that I know that saw it with your own eyes. That's very cool.
Hi, this is Bill Spizzeri. I can tell you in 1994, Central Illinois, we witnessed an annular eclipse, so not totality, but close to totality. And someone on our group measured the temperature, and I think even humidity difference as it changed during the eclipse. And a significant temperature reduction was recorded, and I don't really remember the numbers. It was quite a while ago, and I wasn't the one recording it. But the temperature absolutely changed, and that was only with annular. So with total eclipse, it would probably be more, for sure.
Okay.
I'm not going to promise it's going to happen on Monday, but something to look forward to if you aren't seeing anything for a while. Maybe that's going to happen again. I don't know.
Well, I live out here in the hill country now, and I'm going to have 2 minutes 40 seconds out my door, and I've got all family and all kinds of people coming over, and I'm encouraging them to continue. Don't let the bad weather stop you, because just that you never know, the clouds could part for just a short period of time, and we could have something that memorable. So, if any of you are planning on traveling, I can tell you we're already hearing some tales of high traffic volume here in the hill country, coming out I-10 and up Route 281. So I think the traffic, even though the weather may not be so good, the traffic may be bad here as predicted. Okay, so given that Chris, you want to come off mute and ask the question directly?
Sure, glad to, and like I said, great presentation. Thank you so much, Don. So this is my first eclipse to try to do something a little more than just be aware of it, and I had reservations in the kind of South Texas area, Kerrville, San Antonio area, in Gatesville, kind of more mid-state, and then upper state would be Sulphur Springs area, northeast of Dallas. And I've kind of been monitoring a lot of the, websites, weather sites, and taking in as much as I can. Very volatile, kind of fluid situation. I've decided to go ahead and cancel the low, mid, and locations in Texas, and go with, the Sulphur Springs area up to maybe Clarksville, which is close to the Oklahoma border. I looked at leaving the whole area and going up to Illinois, Ohio. That didn't seem to really work out right now at this late date. or even further up to Maine, that's, just impossible to get up there. So that's kind of where I am. I thought you guys that have the experience, maybe you could say, I'm better to stay here, watch it on TV, or what do you think? I should roll the dice and head up to Silver Springs.
That's for me, that's a bit of a difficult question to answer because, having seen totality with your own eyes, right? It's for most people, it's an awesome experience the first time. I mean, I have to tell you, in Wyoming, my wife thought I was crazy because I spent 2 years plus planning to get up there, and it was like a true movement, right? After seeing totality up there, and she was kind of skeptical. Oh, this will be fine, she was so emotional, and she came over to me, and she was sobbing, and she grabbed me and hugged me, and she apologized for being so skeptical about it. And she was so emotional. I took the opportunity to whisper in her ear. I said, "Okay, well, I accept your apology. So that means we can go to Chile in 2019, right?"
Okay.
Dead silence.
I get it. I've been there, done that too. So
yeah. So if you think it's worth the drive and you're willing to do it, and you haven't ever seen it with your own totality with your own eyes, I would say go for it.
Yeah, I would definitely be there or somewhere if the weather was better. But given where we are, that's the kind of the wild card. It's just such
it really is
forecast for us in Texas.
It really is. I grew up in Buffalo, and when I was there last summer, I took a bunch of eclipse glasses with me and handed them out to friends and family up there, with the idea that because it's going right over the city of Buffalo. So when the early forecast came in on April 1st, it was like twice as good in Buffalo as it was going to be in the Hill Country. So when my wife got up in the morning, I was up ahead of her and saw that. So, pack your bags, honey. We're going to Buffalo. And I got the same blank stare I got about the trip to Chile in 2019. So,
right. Well, my wife thinks I'm about this side of crazy right now with all the telescopes and binoculars I've been acquiring the last couple of years. So this will put the icing on the cake. But I think I'm going to go ahead and hit the road and try it out.
Well, I know, and I think Dawn, you're going up to the Dallas area as well. I think the weather up in that area is going to be better up there than it is going to be here in the Hill Country for sure. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Well, thank you all for your attention. I appreciate it. And if, like I say, if you are going to travel this weekend, please travel safely and get back. And we want to see you on the round trip. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Stephen, have you got anything?
Just wanted to pop back right over here. Quick only get too far ahead. Probably like at the beginning, but yeah, just wanted to real quick remind you guys that next month's meetings, that we'll have the novice meeting on May 2nd at 7 p.m. And next month's general meeting, May 3rd at 7 p.m. You can visit us at astronomyhouston.org for registration details. There's many folks on the call who, if you're a guest, not a member, you can join the club if you're interested up there on the website. You can check us out on all the social medias, everything from there. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, some email info at astronomyhouston.org for more information. Especially when I call your attention to our YouTube channel. If you just joined the club and were wondering what you missed on these meetings in the past, all of our, I would say all, large number of our past general meeting speakers. We've got the video up on YouTube. This one will be as well sometime soon. So we're interested in catching up on what you missed. They got to do. With that, I will sign us off. Have a good evening, clear skies, and good luck to all you facing the eclipse.